There is a kind of power that lives in silence, a strength that emerges not from grasping, but from releasing. And throughout history, the individuals who truly changed the world, who moved through life with an almost supernatural magnetism, understood something that most people spend their entire lives running from. They understood that the moment you stop caring about the things that don't matter, the things that do matter begin to flourish in ways you never imagined possible. This is not about apathy. This is not about becoming cold or disconnected from life. This is about something far more profound, far more dangerous to the systems that profit from your anxiety, your need to please, your desperate hunger for approval. This is about reclaiming the power that you've been giving away since the moment you learned that love was conditional, that acceptance had a price, that your worth was determined by forces outside yourself. Today you're going to walk a path that few dare to travel. You're going to descend into the mind of one of history's most radical thinkers, a man who, in the midst of religious wars and social chaos, locked himself in a tower and asked the only question that truly matters. Not how do I control my world, but how do I live authentically within it. His name was Michel de Montaigne, and what he discovered in that tower, what he wrote in essays that would echo through centuries, contains a method for living that is both terrifyingly simple and devastatingly effective. By the end of this journey, you will understand why everything you've been taught about success, about relationships, about the pursuit of approval, has been precisely backwards. You will see how the very act of trying to control your life is what's keeping you from truly living it. And you will be offered a choice that cannot be undone. Once you see what Montaigne saw, once you understand what detachment truly means, you cannot return to the prison of constant performance, constant anxiety, constant need. You will either step into a new way of being, or you will consciously choose to remain where you are. But you will never again be able to claim ignorance. Let's begin with something uncomfortable. Let's begin with the truth about who you've become. Think back to the earliest memory you have of changing yourself to be accepted. Maybe you were 5 years old, laughing too loudly at something that delighted you, and you saw the look on an adult's face, disapproval, judgment. And in that moment, something inside you learned a lesson that would shape the next decades of your life. Your authentic expression is not acceptable. Your natural state needs to be modified. Your real self needs to be hidden. From that point forward, you began a lifelong negotiation with the world. You learned to modulate your voice. You learned to suppress certain opinions. You learned to dress in ways that signaled belonging. You learned to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to nod at statements you disagreed with, to perform interest in things that bored you. You became a masterful actor in a play you never auditioned for, and the role you were playing was called the acceptable version of me. Years passed. The performance became more sophisticated. You learned the exact tone of voice that makes people comfortable. You learned which parts of your history to share and which to bury. You learned how to craft your social media presence to project success, happiness, and certainty, even when your inner world was chaos. You learned the art of the strategic silence, the diplomatic agreement, the calculated vulnerability that invites connection without risking rejection. And somewhere along the way, something terrible happened. You lost contact with the person underneath the performance. You began to confuse the mask with your face. When people complimented you, the praise felt hollow because deep down you knew they were applauding the costume, not the actor. When people claimed to love you, doubt whispered in the quiet moments because you understood that they loved the version you showed them, not the version that existed in the privacy of your own mind. The exhaustion became your normal state. The anxiety became background noise. The feeling that one wrong move, one moment of authentic expression, one slip of the mask would reveal you as a fraud, became the water you swam in. You stopped noticing it was there. But here's what you need to understand. Here's what keeps you trapped in this cycle. You believe with absolute certainty that the performance is necessary. You believe that if you stop controlling how others perceive you, if you stop carefully managing every word and gesture and choice, that everything will fall apart, that people will leave, that opportunities will vanish, that the life you've built will crumble. And this belief, this unexamined assumption, is precisely what Montaigne spent his life dismantling. Because what if the opposite is true? What if your desperate need to control is exactly what's destroying your peace, your creativity, your capacity for genuine connection? What if confidence and success don't come from perfecting the performance, but from having the courage to drop it entirely? Michel de Montaigne was not born into tranquility. He lived in 16th century France, during a time when religious wars tore communities apart, when choosing the wrong theological position could mean death, when certainty was the currency of survival, and doubt was a luxury no one could afford. Into this chaos, into a world that demanded unwavering conviction, Montaigne brought something revolutionary. He brought questions. At the age of 38, after years of public service, after experiencing loss and near death, and the grinding demands of a world that wanted him to choose sides, to declare allegiances, to perform certainty he didn't feel, Montaigne did something radical. He retreated, not in defeat, not in cowardice, but in recognition that the most important project of his life was not out there in the world of politics and positions. It was inside. It was understanding himself. He locked himself in a tower in his family estate. He lined the walls with books, and he began to write essays, not to prove a point, not to win an argument, not to establish a doctrine or build a following. He wrote to observe, to question, to explore the vast and contradictory landscape of his own mind. And what he discovered there, what he articulated with a clarity that still feels dangerous today, was that human beings are obsessed with control in proportion to how little control they actually have. We create elaborate systems of belief and behavior to manage the unmanageable. We build identities around certainty to shield ourselves from the terror of uncertainty. And in doing so, we construct prisons far more confining than any external authority could ever impose. Montaigne looked at the great philosophical systems of his time, the religious doctrines, the social hierarchies, the unquestioned assumptions about how life should be lived, and he asked a simple question. Why? Why do we believe what we believe? Why do we pursue what we pursue? Why do we organize our entire existence around pleasing others, around fitting into categories, around achieving markers of success that we never chose for ourselves? And the more he questioned, the more he realized that most of human suffering comes not from life itself, but from our relationship with life. From our need to control outcomes we cannot control. From our attachment to perceptions we cannot guarantee. From our belief that if we just manage everything perfectly, if we just perform well enough, if we just make ourselves acceptable enough, then we will finally be safe, finally be worthy, finally be enough. This is the paradox Montaigne lived and breathed. The more you try to control life, the more life eludes you. The more you perform for approval, the more hollow that approval feels. The more you grasp, the more slips through your fingers. And the answer, the solution he offered, was not a new system of control. It was something far more radical. It was detachment. We have been sold a lie about control, and it's destroying us. From the moment we're old enough to understand cause and effect, we're taught that control equals safety. Master your emotions, and you'll be respected. Control your appearance, and you'll be loved. Manage other people's perceptions, and you'll be successful. Plan every detail, and you'll avoid suffering. The message is clear, and it's repeated everywhere. Control is power. Surrender is weakness. So we spend our lives in a state of constant vigilance. We monitor our words before we speak them. We rehearse conversations before they happen. We craft perfect responses to emails. We curate our social media to project an image of effortless success. We try to anticipate every possible negative outcome and build contingency plans. We attempt to manage not just our own behavior, but the behavior and opinions of everyone around us. We become strategists of our own existence, calculating every move, every choice, every word. And the promise is always the same. If you just control it well enough, if you just think it through carefully enough, if you just manage every variable, then you will be safe, you will be accepted, you will succeed. The anxiety you feel is just a sign that you haven't achieved sufficient control yet. The exhaustion is temporary. Keep pushing, keep managing, keep controlling. But Montaigne saw through this. He saw it with brutal clarity because he lived it. He held public office. He negotiated between warring factions. He played the game of social positioning and political maneuvering. And then he had an experience that shattered the illusion completely. He was thrown from a horse. It was not dramatic. It was not theatrical. It was a common accident, the kind that happened regularly in his time. But for a few moments, as he lay there hovering between consciousness and unconsciousness, he experienced something that would change his entire philosophy. He experienced the absolute fragility of existence, the complete impossibility of control. All his planning, all his careful management of his life and reputation and future, all of it could be erased in an instant by a spooked animal. And in that moment of clarity, he understood something profound. He had been living as if life was a problem to be solved through sufficient control, when in fact, life was something far more wild, far more unpredictable, far more beautiful and terrifying than any system of control could ever encompass. He later wrote something that has echoed through the centuries, something that captures the absurdity of our relationship with anxiety and control. He said his life had been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. Think about that. Most of the suffering we experience is not from actual events, but from our catastrophic imagination of potential events. We torture ourselves with scenarios that exist only in our minds. We destroy our peace today, worrying about disasters that will never arrive. This is the cruel joke of control. The more you try to control everything, the more you distance yourself from reality. You stop responding to what actually is, and you start reacting to what might be. You stop living your life and start managing your anxiety about your life. And in that gap between reality and your anxious projection of reality, all your energy drains away. Montaigne realized that the attempt to control the uncontrollable is not just futile. It's the primary source of human misery. When you try to control other people's opinions of you, you become their prisoner. When you try to control future outcomes, you become incapable of being present. When you try to control your own emotions, you create internal warfare. The very act of control separates you from the flow of life itself. And here's what makes this so dangerous to recognize. Once you see it, once you truly understand that your attempts at control are creating the very suffering they're meant to prevent, you cannot unsee it. You will watch yourself trying to manage a conversation and recognize the exhaustion of it. You will catch yourself rehearsing what you'll say to impress someone and feel the hollowness of it. You will notice the moment you start performing instead of being, and you will feel the cage you've been living in. The question becomes, if control is an illusion and attempting it is causing your suffering, what's the alternative? This is where most people panic. Because if you're not controlling everything, isn't that just chaos? Isn't that just recklessness? This is where we need to understand what Montaigne actually meant by detachment. From the first day of consciousness, we learn a simple equation: approval equals survival. A baby cries and is fed, and learns that expression leads to response. But as we grow, the equation becomes more complex and more sinister. We learn that certain expressions are rewarded and others are punished. Certain behaviors bring warmth and others bring coldness. Certain versions of ourselves are celebrated and others are rejected. And so we begin the great project of self-editing. We learn to shape ourselves into whatever form seems most likely to generate approval. The child who is praised for being quiet learns to suppress enthusiasm. The child who is rewarded for achievement learns to measure worth in accomplishments. The child who receives attention for being helpful learns to abandon their own needs to serve others. By the time we reach adulthood, we have become extraordinary sculptors of the self. We have learned to present different versions depending on the audience. There's the professional you, the family you, the friend you, the social media you, each carefully crafted, each designed to maximize approval and minimize rejection. And underneath all these versions, there's a question you've stopped asking because the answer is too painful. Which one is real? Montaigne wrote his essays in private with no intention of publication initially. He was writing for an audience of one, himself. He was trying to figure out what he actually thought, what he actually felt, what he actually believed when no one was watching. And what he discovered was both liberating and terrifying. Most of what he believed, most of what he thought was his authentic self, was actually just an accumulation of other people's expectations. He wrote, "We are, I know not how, double in ourselves." One version performing for the world, another version hidden away, often even from ourselves. And the tragedy is that the more successful the performance, the more we lose contact with the hidden version. We become so skilled at being what others want that we forget what we want. We become so adept at shaping ourselves for approval that we lose the ability to recognize our own authentic desires. This is the prison of external validation. It's not that you're locked in by others, it's that you've become your own jailer. You've internalized the judgment so completely that you don't even need external critics anymore. You've become the critic. You monitor yourself constantly, adjusting, correcting, performing, all in service of an approval that even when it comes, feels empty. Because here's the dark truth about validation earned through performance. When someone praises you, when someone says they love you, when someone offers you acceptance, you know in the depths of your being that they're responding to the mask, not the face beneath it. They love the version you showed them. They approve of the performance you delivered. And so the validation, no matter how much of it you accumulate, never touches the real you. The real you remains unseen, unknown, unloved. Montaigne asked himself two questions that cut through all the performance and pretense. Who are you trying to please and why? These seem simple, but sit with them for a moment. Really sit with them. Who are you trying to please in this moment, in your life, in your choices? Is it your parents? Is it your peers? Is it some imagined audience of judgment? Is it a version of yourself that you think you should be? And more importantly, why? Why is their approval so crucial? What are you afraid will happen if you stop performing for them? What do you believe about yourself that makes their opinion of you more important than your own experience of yourself? When you truly examine these questions, when you dig beneath the surface answers, you often find something unexpected. You find that you're trying to please people whose opinions you don't actually respect. You find that you're pursuing validation from sources that don't align with your values. You find that the entire system of approval you've built your life around is arbitrary, conditional, and ultimately meaningless. And this recognition, painful as it is the first step toward freedom. Because once you see that you've been performing for an audience that doesn't deserve the power you've given them, once you recognize that the approval you've been desperately seeking wouldn't satisfy you, even if you achieved it, you can begin to ask a different question. What if I simply stopped? What if you stopped trying to be impressive and just spoke your truth? What if you stopped managing perceptions and just lived according to your values? What if you stopped performing and just existed? The terror of this question is matched only by its potential for liberation, because on the other side of that terror is something you've forgotten. The lightness of being yourself, the ease of authenticity, the profound relief of not having to remember which mask you're wearing. Montaigne discovered that self-acceptance is not a destination you reach after perfecting yourself. It's a choice you make to drop the war against yourself. It's the decision to stop treating yourself as a project that needs fixing and start experiencing yourself as a human being worthy of existence exactly as you are. This is not self-indulgence. This is not lowering your standards. This is the recognition that your worth is not conditional on your performance, your achievements, or anyone else's opinion. And here's the paradox that Montaigne lived. The moment he stopped trying to be acceptable to others, he became genuinely interesting. The moment he stopped performing certainty, his honesty became magnetic. The moment he stopped hiding his contradictions and confusions, people were drawn to him in a way they never had been when he was playing the role of the polished public servant. Authenticity, it turns out, is not something you achieve. It's what remains when you stop pretending. Now we arrive at the heart of Montaigne's method, and this is where most people misunderstand completely. When they hear the word detachment, they imagine coldness. They picture someone who doesn't care about anything, who moves through life without passion or investment, who has become emotionally numb to avoid being hurt. This is not detachment. This is avoidance. And Montaigne would have recognized it immediately as just another form of control. True detachment is not the absence of care. It's the presence of clarity. It's the ability to distinguish between what deserves your energy and what merely drains it. It's knowing the difference between dedication and obsession, between love and possession, between commitment and attachment to outcome. Montaigne cared deeply about his writing, but he was detached from whether anyone read it. He loved profoundly, but he was detached from controlling those he loved. He held strong opinions, but he was detached from needing others to share them. This is the nuance that makes detachment powerful rather than empty. Think about how you approach the things that matter to you, your work, your relationships, your creative projects, your ambitions. How much of your energy goes into the doing, and how much goes into worrying about the outcome? How much is genuine engagement, and how much is anxious management? How much is love, and how much is fear of loss? When you're attached to outcome, you cannot be fully present in process. When you're obsessed with how something will be received, you cannot create freely. When you're terrified of rejection, you cannot offer authentic connection. Attachment creates a barrier between you and the very thing you claim to care about. Montaigne wrote his essays not because he was trying to build a legacy or establish a philosophical school or convince anyone of anything. He wrote because he was curious. He wrote because the act of writing helped him think. He wrote because observation and articulation of his own experience was inherently interesting to him, regardless of external validation. This is detachment in action, full engagement without desperate need, complete dedication without anxious grasping, genuine care without the poison of control. And here's the paradox that makes this so powerful. The less you need to prove something, the more convincing you become. The less you try to control how you're perceived, the more naturally magnetic your presence becomes. The less you grasp for validation, the more people offer it freely. Because authenticity, true authenticity that comes from detachment rather than strategic vulnerability, is rare enough that people recognize it immediately. When you meet someone who is truly detached, you feel it. They're not performing. They're not managing your perception of them. They're not calculating their words or monitoring their image. They're simply present, simply themselves, and that presence has a quality of ease and power that no amount of careful self-presentation can replicate. This is because detachment creates coherence. When you're not constantly performing, when you're not managing multiple versions of yourself for different audiences, when you're not hiding parts of yourself you judge as unacceptable, your inner state and outer expression align. You feel one thing, think one thing, say one thing, do one thing. There's no gap, no pretense, no exhausting maintenance of masks. And this coherence, this alignment between internal and external, is what people call charisma. It's not a technique you learn. It's what naturally emerges when you stop fragmenting yourself for approval. Montaigne loved without needing to possess. He pursued goals without needing to control every variable. He cared about outcomes without being destroyed when outcomes didn't match his hopes. He engaged fully with life while holding his engagement lightly. This is the art of detachment, living with open hands instead of clenched fists, dancing with reality instead of demanding that reality conform to your expectations. And the question for you is, what would change in your life if you approached it this way? If you cared deeply but detached from outcome? If you loved fully but released control? If you pursued your goals with dedication but without the crushing weight of needing them to define your worth? What would become possible if you loosened your grip? We have this image of great minds as somehow superhuman, as if their insights came from being more than human, from transcending the messiness and pain and confusion that defines ordinary existence. But Montaigne offers us something far more valuable than that. He offers us the power of being deeply, unapologetically, courageously human. Montaigne was not a saint. He was not a sage, untouched by suffering. He was a man who experienced profound loss and kept living. He buried 5 of his 6 children. He lost his closest friend, Etienne de la Boétie, a loss that haunted him for the rest of his life. He lived through brutal civil wars where neighbors turned against neighbors over theological differences. He experienced the near death from his horse accident. He suffered from painful kidney stones. He knew betrayal, disappointment, physical agony, and the seemingly random cruelty that life distributes without regard for merit or morality. And his response to all this suffering was not to become harder. It was not to build walls around his heart or construct philosophical systems that promised protection from pain. His response was to become more human, more honest about his vulnerabilities, more willing to confess his weaknesses, more committed to understanding rather than defending. He retreated to his tower not to escape life, but to study it. And the subject of his study was himself in all his contradiction and confusion. He wrote about his body, about his habits, about his fears and desires and doubts. He wrote about trivial things, about thumb-twiddling and the way he liked his food prepared. He wrote about profound things, about death and friendship and the nature of existence. And he made no distinction between the trivial and profound, because he understood that a human life contains both, inextricably mixed. In an era that demanded certainty, he offered doubt. In a culture that prized consistency, he revealed his contradictions. In a society that rewarded the projection of strength, he confessed his weaknesses. And in doing so, he did something revolutionary. He made imperfection not just acceptable, but interesting, not just tolerable, but admirable. He wrote, "I do not portray myself as I am, but as I see myself at this moment." This single sentence contains a liberation that most people never experience. He's acknowledging that he's not presenting some fixed, perfect, definitive version of himself. He's showing you one moment of self-perception, knowing full well that tomorrow he might see himself differently. He's releasing himself from the prison of consistency, from the demand that he be the same person in every moment, from the exhausting project of maintaining a coherent identity. And here's what makes this so powerful in our current age. We live in a time of curated perfection. Every platform encourages us to show only our best moments, our achievements, our highlights. We've created a culture where everyone is performing success, performing happiness, performing certainty. And beneath all that performance, people are drowning in anxiety, in the feeling that they're the only one struggling, the only one confused, the only one who doesn't have it all figured out. Montaigne is the antidote to this poison. He's standing there across 4 centuries saying, "I don't have it figured out. I'm contradictory. I'm uncertain. I'm weak in ways that embarrass me. I'm strong in ways that surprise me. I change my mind. I contradict myself. I'm human." And that's not just okay. That's the whole point. When you drop the performance of perfection, when you stop pretending to be anything other than what you are, something magical happens. Other people feel safe to do the same. Your vulnerability gives others permission to be vulnerable. Your honesty about struggle makes others feel less alone in theirs. Your willingness to be imperfect creates space for genuine connection in a way that your carefully curated highlights never could. This is not about oversharing or making your struggles everyone else's burden. This is about the quiet dignity of not pretending. It's about the strength it takes to be honest when everyone around you is performing. It's about the courage required to say, "I don't know," in a culture that rewards false certainty. Montaigne discovered that imperfection is not something to overcome. It's the texture of authentic existence. And when you stop fighting it, when you stop trying to sand away all your rough edges and contradictions, you stop wasting energy on an impossible project. That energy becomes available for actually living, for creating, for connecting, for experiencing the fullness of existence, instead of constantly managing your presentation of existence. The question is, what mask are you exhausted from maintaining? What performance of perfection is draining your life force? What would it feel like to simply stop, to let people see you as you actually are, flaws and contradictions and all? The terror of that question is matched only by the liberation on the other side of it. Most of our suffering in relationships comes not from the relationships themselves, but from what we try to make them into. We meet someone, and instead of appreciating them for who they are, we immediately begin the project of trying to shape them into who we think they should be. We enter friendships and partnerships with a blueprint in our minds, and we spend our time and energy trying to force reality to conform to that blueprint. This is possession disguised as love. This is control disguised as care. And Montaigne recognized it with the clarity that comes from having experienced something entirely different. His friendship with Etienne de la Boétie was the defining relationship of his life. When he wrote about it, he struggled to explain what made it so profound. He famously wrote, "If you press me to say why I loved him, I can say no more than it was because he was he, and I was I." This seems like a non-answer, but it's actually the deepest answer possible. He loved his friend not for what his friend could provide, not for how his friend made him look, not because his friend met some list of qualifications. He loved him because of the mysterious, inexplicable recognition that happens when two beings truly see each other. There were no demands in this friendship, no attempts to change or improve or mold. There was presence, deep presence, and the freedom to be exactly who they were in that presence. And when La Boétie died young, Montaigne's grief was profound precisely because the loss was of something real, something that hadn't been contaminated by the projects of control and possession that ruined so many relationships. Think about your own relationships. How much energy are you spending trying to change people? How many of your frustrations come from the gap between who someone is and who you think they should be? How often are you in conversation but not really present because you're strategizing about what to say next or how to steer the interaction toward your desired outcome? This is the exhausting mathematics of control in relationships. You're constantly calculating. If I say this, they'll think that. If I act this way, they'll respond that way. If I can just get them to understand, to change, to see things my way, then everything will be fine. And meanwhile, you're not actually in relationship with the person in front of you. You're in relationship with your projection of who you want them to be. Here's the paradox that Montaigne lived and that modern psychology has confirmed. The more you try to hold someone, the more they feel suffocated and pull away. The more you try to control a relationship, the more the relationship becomes a battleground rather than a sanctuary. But when you offer freedom, when you release the grip of expectation and control, when you allow someone to simply be who they are without trying to manage or change them, something shifts. They stop feeling like they have to defend themselves against your judgment. They stop feeling like they're failing to live up to your expectations. They experience the rare and precious gift of being fully accepted, not for who they might become or who you want them to be, but for who they actually are. And in that space of acceptance, people often become more of themselves, more authentic, more present, more capable of genuine connection. This doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. This doesn't mean you accept destructive behavior or remain in relationships that harm you. Detachment in relationships means you see clearly what is without the distorting lens of what you wish was. And from that clear seeing, you can make choices. You can choose to stay or leave, to engage or distance yourself, but those choices come from clarity rather than from desperate attempts to control something fundamentally uncontrollable, another human being. The freedom you offer others is the same freedom you're giving yourself. Freedom from the exhausting project of trying to manage another person's thoughts, feelings, choices, and development. Freedom to simply be present, to enjoy what is, to allow relationship to unfold naturally rather than forcing it into predetermined shapes. Montaigne wrote about friendship as the highest form of human relationship precisely because friendship, at its best, contains this quality of freedom. You're not bound by legal contracts or social obligations or family roles. You choose each other continuously, freely, and that choice, made from freedom rather than need, from appreciation rather than possession, creates something far stronger than any bond forged through control. The question becomes, what would your relationships look like if you released your grip? If you stopped trying to change people and just allowed them to be? If you offered them the same freedom you wish they would offer you? The answer might surprise you, because very often, when you stop clutching, people move closer. When you stop demanding, they offer freely. When you stop controlling, they choose you, genuinely, from their own authentic desire rather than from obligation or fear. There is a moment in every person's journey when something inside simply lets go, not because you've given up, not because you've been defeated, but because you've reached a kind of sacred exhaustion with the project of control. You've tried so hard for so long to manage everything, to prevent every negative outcome, to control every perception, to shape every situation to your will. And suddenly, quietly, often without fanfare or decision, something in you says, enough. This is not weakness. This is not resignation. This is the moment when you stop fighting reality and start flowing with it. This is when you release the illusion that if you just tried harder, worried more intensely, controlled more carefully, that you could guarantee the outcomes you desire. This is when you finally accept what Montaigne knew. You cannot control life, but you can choose how you move through it. Surrender, in Montaigne's understanding, is not about giving up on what matters. It's about giving up on what doesn't. It's about recognizing that most of what you're attempting to control is either impossible to control or not worth the energy you're spending on it. It's about distinguishing between the things you can influence and the things you cannot, and having the wisdom to focus your energy accordingly. When you truly let go of control, several things happen simultaneously. First, you speak more honestly. You stop calculating every word for maximum strategic impact and start saying what you actually think. This doesn't mean you become rude or thoughtless. It means you become real. You express yourself authentically, trusting that the right people will respond to the real you and that the approval of people who only like your performance was never worth having anyway. Second, you act with more courage. When you're not paralyzed by trying to control every possible outcome, when you're not spending all your energy on risk management and disaster prevention, you have energy available for bold action. You can take risks because you're not attached to guaranteed success. You can try things because you're curious about the experience rather than desperate for a specific result. Third, you create more freely. Whether you're creating art or businesses or relationships, or simply creating your life, freedom from outcome allows you to fully engage with the process. You're not constantly judging whether what you're making will be good enough, impressive enough, successful enough. You're making it because making it is worthwhile in itself. And paradoxically, the work that comes from this place of detachment is often far more powerful than the work that comes from desperate need to prove something. Fourth, you love more openly. When you're not trying to control how love unfolds, when you're not managing and strategizing and protecting yourself through careful calculation, you can offer your heart freely. You can be vulnerable because vulnerability is no longer a strategic weakness to be managed, but simply an honest expression of caring. And this kind of love, love offered without the strings of control, is the only kind of love that truly satisfies. Montaigne wrote about living with the constancy of impermanence. He knew that nothing lasts forever. Friends die, health fails, circumstances change. The future you planned for becomes the past you never expected. And his response was not to grip tighter, not to build more elaborate defenses against change, but to release his attachment to permanence itself. This is the deepest level of surrender. It's not just letting go of control over specific outcomes. It's letting go of the need for anything to be permanent. It's accepting that everything you love will change. Everything you build may crumble. Every person you're close to will eventually leave or be left. And rather than letting this truth create despair, you let it create presence. When you truly accept impermanence, when you stop fighting the fundamental nature of existence, you become capable of being fully here, now, with whatever is happening. You stop living in anxious projection of terrible futures or nostalgic grasping at past moments. You stop missing your life because you're too busy trying to control it. And in this present, flowing state, something remarkable happens. Life becomes richer, not because anything external has changed, but because you're finally experiencing it directly instead of through the filter of your anxious control. Colors are brighter because you're not worried about what color they should be. Conversations are more engaging because you're listening instead of planning your response. Experiences are more vivid because you're in them instead of managing them. This is the peace Montaigne found in his tower. Not the peace of having figured everything out or achieving perfect control, the peace of releasing the fight. The peace of dancing with reality instead of demanding it conform to your will. The peace of being human in a world that's constantly changing, constantly uncertain, constantly wild with possibility. The question is simple but profound. What are you clutching so tightly that it's hurting you? What control are you maintaining at the cost of your peace? And what might happen if you simply opened your hand and let it go? Montaigne left us no grand system, no step-by-step program, no promises of transformation if you just follow his method. This is intentional. Because a system would be just another form of control, another way of trying to manage and perfect and guarantee outcomes. Instead, he left us something far more valuable, a way of inhabiting existence. His essays circle around the same themes again and again, but never in the same way twice. Because he's not trying to establish dogma, he's showing you how a mind works when it's free from the need to arrive at permanent conclusions. He's demonstrating what thinking looks like when you're not performing certainty for an audience but genuinely exploring uncertainty for yourself. And through that demonstration, through the honesty of his self-examination, he reveals several truths that threaten the foundation of how most people organize their lives. The first truth, excessive control, is the opposite of freedom. You think that if you just control enough variables, you'll be free from anxiety and uncertainty. But the opposite is true. The more you try to control, the more imprisoned you become. Because control requires constant vigilance, constant monitoring, constant adjustment. You become a slave to your own attempts at mastery. True freedom comes not from controlling everything, but from being at peace with controlling very little. The second truth, the endless attempt to please others, is the enemy of authentic existence. As long as you're shaping yourself to meet external expectations, as long as you're performing for approval, you're not free to discover who you actually are beneath the performance. Montaigne gave himself permission to be inconsistent, contradictory, uncertain, and in doing so became more genuinely himself than any performance of perfection could ever achieve. The third truth, fear of failure is the barrier between you and the life you actually want. You're so afraid of attempting something and failing, so terrified of being judged or rejected or proven inadequate, that you never attempt at all. You stay in the safe, the known, the controllable. And in doing so, you forfeit the possibility of surprise, of discovery, of genuine achievement that comes from risk rather than calculated certainty. Montaigne faced death, faced loss, faced failure, and what he learned was that the anticipation was always worse than the reality. The catastrophes we imagine are almost always more terrible than what actually unfolds. And even when life brings genuine tragedy, we discover that we're more resilient, more capable of continuing than our anxious projections ever gave us credit for. The fourth truth, detachment, is trust, not abandonment. This is crucial to understand. When Montaigne advocates for detachment, he's not suggesting you stop caring or stop trying. He's suggesting you trust the process enough to release your white-knuckled grip on outcome. He's suggesting you engage fully while holding the results lightly. He's suggesting that the quality of your engagement improves dramatically when you're not desperate for specific results. Think of it this way. When you're desperate to impress someone, you become less impressive. When you're attached to a specific outcome, you lose the flexibility to recognize better outcomes you hadn't imagined. When you're clutching tightly to one possibility, you close yourself off to other possibilities. Detachment opens you. It allows you to respond to what actually is rather than what you desperately need to be. And here's where Montaigne's method becomes truly radical. When you release control, when you stop performing for approval, when you let go of desperate attachment to specific outcomes, something unexpected happens. Not in spite of your detachment, but because of it, you become more effective. Because you're responding to reality rather than fighting it. You become more creative. Because your energy isn't consumed by anxiety about judgment, you become more connected. Because people sense authenticity and are drawn to it in a way they're never drawn to perfect performance. This is the silent power that Montaigne embodied, not the power of domination or control, the power of authenticity, the power of presence, the power of being so thoroughly yourself that you don't need anything from anyone else to feel complete. When you stop caring about things that don't actually matter, other people's superficial opinions, arbitrary standards of success, the need to prove your worth to people whose judgment is irrelevant, you create space for the things that do matter to grow. Your authentic relationships deepen. Your meaningful work improves. Your capacity for joy and presence and genuine experience expands. This is the paradox at the heart of Montaigne's method. The less you grasp, the more you receive. The less you perform, the more genuinely impressive you become. The less you try to control, the more influence you actually have. Not because you're manipulating these outcomes, but because you've aligned yourself with the way life actually works rather than fighting against it. So here we stand at the edge of a precipice. You've walked this far into Montaigne's world, into this understanding of detachment and authenticity and release. And now comes the question that matters. Not what do you think about these ideas, but what will you do with them? Because understanding changes nothing. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. You can nod along with everything you've heard here, you can find it interesting or compelling or true, and you can return to your life exactly as it was, still clutching, still performing, still imprisoned by the need for control and approval. Or you can choose differently. So I'm asking you directly now, what are you gripping so tightly that it's already causing you pain? Is it a relationship you're trying to control? Is it an outcome you're desperately attached to? Is it an image you're exhausting yourself maintaining? Is it an approval you're endlessly seeking? What would happen if you simply let go? Not recklessly, not carelessly, but consciously, deliberately, with the understanding that the grip itself is the problem. What would happen if you trusted that you could handle whatever comes? What would happen if you believed that your worth doesn't depend on controlling every variable? What would happen if you gave yourself permission to be authentic, even if it means being imperfect? Here's what I want you to do. In the comments below, I want you to write one thing, not an essay, not a perfect statement, just one honest sentence about the first small step you'll take toward living with more freedom and less fear. Maybe it's, I'm going to stop checking social media for validation after I post. Maybe it's, I'm going to tell someone I care about them without managing how they might respond. Maybe it's, I'm going to pursue that project I've been afraid to start. Maybe it's, I'm going to stop pretending I have everything figured out. Whatever it is, write it down, make it public. Not because I need to know, but because you need to say it. Because there's power in declaring your intention. Because the moment you articulate the change you're choosing, you've already begun to embody it. And then, if this exploration has meant something to you, if Montaigne's wisdom has offered you a glimpse of a different way of being, hit that like button. Not as a passive gesture of agreement, but as an active declaration that you're choosing a different path. Subscribe to this channel as a symbolic commitment to continuing this journey, to deepening this understanding, to learning how to live with open hands instead of clenched fists. Because here's what I know. The world will try to pull you back into control, into performance, into the desperate seeking of approval. It's designed that way. But every time you choose authenticity over performance, every time you choose presence over control, every time you choose to be yourself rather than what you think others want you to be, you're not just changing your own life. You're giving permission to everyone who witnesses you to do the same. You're becoming the example Montaigne was. Not perfect, not certain, not in control of everything, but free. Genuinely, deeply, courageously free. So write that comment, make that choice, take that first step, and discover what's been waiting for you on the other side of your grip. The tower stands open. The question remains, will you enter?